Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating story. We're going to look at exactly how America's early religious foundations were, well, painstakingly built from the ground up, and then how they surprisingly unraveled. It's this incredible look at faith, basic survival, incredibly strict social order, and honestly, the unintended consequences of wild success.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at our chronological roadmap for untangling this dense 60-plus year period of history. We've got 5 parts: setting the colonial stage, Pilgrims and the Mayflower, the Great Puritan Migration, reactions and dissenters, and finally, the decline of Puritanism.
First up, Section 1, Setting the Colonial Stage. Let's get the scene set for these early English settlements in the New World.
Looking at this timeline, you can really see the key sequential milestones that laid the groundwork. Now, before the major religious movements actually took hold, we had the founding of the Jamestown colony down in Virginia back in 1607. Jamestown was essentially a trading colony for the British Empire. But its religious history gets kind of clouded and lost in mystery. The real, solid religious base for American culture begins slightly later, shifting our focus north to 1620 and 1628.
Moving right along to Section 2, Pilgrims and the Mayflower.
Now, we need to explicitly clarify a super common point of confusion here. People mix up the Pilgrims and the Puritans all the time, right? But historically and theologically, they were totally distinct groups. The Pilgrims, the folks who settled Plymouth in 1620, were separatists. They had already completely broken away from the Anglican Church in England to become their own independent thing. The Puritans, on the other hand, who arrived a bit later to settle places like Boston, were actually devout Anglicans. They didn't want to leave the Church of England, they just wanted to, well, purify it from the inside out, specifically by simplifying the liturgy and shifting over to a congregation-led structure.
And this brilliantly illustrates what they went through. I mean, just imagine crossing the treacherous Atlantic Ocean in the 17th century in a vessel like this. We're talking about a brutal, perilous journey lasting 2 to 3 months, with roughly 120 to 150 souls packed on board, heading straight into a vast, completely unknown wilderness. Absolutely wild to think about.
But before they even stepped foot off that ship onto Plymouth Rock, their political leader, William Bradford, along with the other men on board, signed the famous Mayflower Compact. They committed to 3 core ideals: the glory of God, the advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor of their king and country. What you should really take away from this is how these early settlers absolutely did not see a contradiction between their faith and their civic duties. To them, religious purposes and civil purposes were glued together for the common good of the entire colony.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Great Puritan Migration. So the crucial point of this era is captured perfectly in this famous quote from John Winthrop. He was the man chosen as governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony a staggering 12 times. He declared that they were building a city upon a hill. Winthrop's whole vision for Boston was for it to serve as a beacon, an exemplary society to the rest of the world, showing what it truly meant to glorify God, not just in private religious life, but in literally every aspect of civic life.
To really wrap your head around the impact of this vision, you just have to look at the sheer scale of the migration. Within just 12 short years, by 1640, an estimated 20,000 Puritans had settled the area. 20,000. This wasn't just some small, struggling outpost. This was a massive influx of people establishing towns like Ipswich, Salem, Dorchester, and Boston, firmly cementing a culture that would influence the continent for centuries to come.
Fast forward to 1648, and the Pilgrims down in Plymouth and the Puritans up in the Massachusetts Bay Colony realized they'd been living next door to each other long enough to just put their old theological differences aside. Because despite the Puritans starting as Anglicans and the Pilgrims as separatists, they both fiercely believed that churches should be run by the local congregation, not by some high-ranking hierarchy of bishops. So they hammered out the Cambridge Platform. This was a formal agreement where they essentially merged to charter an entirely new denomination: American Congregationalism.
Okay, moving on to Section 4, reactions and dissenters. Because that strict, foundational society, it naturally created some fierce internal pushback.
First up in the pushback category was a man named Roger Williams. Now, Williams was a Puritan himself, but he quickly found the Boston rules completely stifling. For instance, in Boston, you literally had to be a formalized member of the church just to get the right to vote. Williams didn't just want the government to merely tolerate different religious views. He demanded true religious freedom. This fierce disagreement led him to just pack up, leave Boston, head south, and establish an entirely new colony as a refuge, what we know today as Providence, Rhode Island.
But the clashes with other groups were even more tragic. Take the Quakers, an independent group that started arriving in Boston. They were seen by the Puritans as highly dangerous heretics. The Puritan leadership genuinely believed that allowing the Quakers to spread their theology would completely unglue their carefully maintained social order. And there's a real irony here. While the Quakers were fundamentally a people of peace who completely opposed warfare, the Puritan authorities reacted to them with extreme force. The execution of several Quakers, including Mary Dyer, who was hanged on Boston Common, was used by the Puritans to ruthlessly enforce their societal boundaries.
Another major threat to the Puritan social order came from Anne Hutchinson. She basically broke two massive social norms of the time. First, as a woman, she was leading theological discussions and Bible studies for both men and women in her own home, which was strictly forbidden in their culture. And second, she was teaching a theology that emphasized God's grace over the traditional Puritan focus on strict predestination. The Puritan leadership felt deeply threatened by her ideas, which eventually led to a trial and her excommunication. And, much like many others disenfranchised by Boston's strictness, Hutchinson ended up seeking refuge down in Rhode Island.
Let's move to Section 5, the decline of Puritanism, and see how this all builds toward an eventual unraveling.
The really pivotal shift in the decline of Puritanism is defined by something called the Halfway Covenant, established between 1657 and 1662. Originally, you see, to be a church member in the Puritan world, you had to clearly articulate and demonstrate your distinct personal faith. But the later generations, they started compromising on that early strictness. The Halfway Covenant was basically an allowance that granted church membership to people simply for being good, moral citizens, without requiring that strict personal profession of faith.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these specific compromises drastically diluted those original stringent foundations. Suddenly, not only could you join just by having good ethical behavior, but the church also started baptizing the children of non-believers. On top of that, they opened up communion to everyone in the congregation, regardless of whether they were actual professed believers. For a lot of historians, these compromises demonstrated a severe, fundamental diminishing of the colony's original biblical roots.
So why did this all happen? Well, historians usually point to two deeply intertwined causes. On one hand, you had a stark lack of religious zeal. The third and fourth generations just kind of lost interest in the strict evangelism and discipline that their grandparents had. But on the other hand, there was a massive increase in wealth. And it's a profound irony, really. The original Puritan work ethic demanded prudent, careful financial management to serve God. But over the generations, that ethic generated incredible wealth. And instead of pouring it back into the church or the community, later generations started focusing on themselves. They started building lavish, massive, personal mansions, like the gorgeous ones you can still see on Chestnut Street in Salem today. Ultimately, their very success distracted them from their original spiritual zeal.
Which leaves us with a totally fascinating historical cliffhanger. The Puritans established this incredibly dominant culture, right? But just a century later, that original strict zeal had radically declined. So we have to ask, when a foundational religious life in a society rapidly fades like that, what exactly steps in to take its place? It's a deeply thought-provoking question, and it perfectly sets the stage for the next great chapter of American society. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.